Welcome back, everybody, to the Americans for Truth Hour. I'm Pete LaBarbera, president of Americans for Truth about homosexuality. We are a single-issue organization devoted to opposing the very powerful homosexual, bisexual, transgender lobby. And we have been doing this for years. We are trying to correct a lot of the misinformation that's in the culture, which is why we are doing a 4-part in-depth interview with Judith Reisman. Judith is the founder of the Institute for Media Education. She's published a number of books, but she is best known for exposing the founder of sexology in the United States, Alfred Kinsey. And Judith, welcome back to the Americans for Truth Hour.
Thank you, Peter. And I think now you can also add the fact that I am officially on board at Liberty University as a professor of law in the School of Law.
Well, that is their tremendous gain, Judith, and I'm so happy to hear you're established there, and we expect many great things to come from that. And Judith, I'm guiltily admitting to you that I only this week finally started tackling one of your big works on Kinsey, which is called Kinsey, Crimes and Consequences. When did you publish this, Judith? It looks like 1998?
Well, yeah, it was, and then we reissued it in 1998, and then it got edited and reissued again. There are 2 more. There's 2000 and then 2003.
Well, your first book, which really drew a lot of attention, was Kinsey, Sex and Fraud. This is a follow-on to that, and I have to say, Judith, I'm very upset. I mean, I thought I knew something about Kinsey. Obviously, I didn't know as much as I thought. It's just an incredible story, and I never cease to be amazed at not just Kinsey, but the whole sexology fraud that has been perpetrated on the American people. And I want to get into some of the institutions today with you, the methods that are used, this crazy thing, SAR, which is the sexual attitude restructuring.
The FUCK-orama.
Yeah, the FUCK-orama, because you've got to get those students to understand, to just accept in their mind all these tremendous perversions. But Judith, the more I read of your work, and I have a lot of catching up to do, I really believe you are an authentic American hero, because this is stuff that should have been done before, and there were people who tried to expose Kinsey, but you've done it in such a thorough way. And you've gotten this truth out there, and it's just astonishing. Some of the things you write about, which could not be made up, and I want to talk about that with you. But
Good.
First, since we're on part 3 here again.
About time you started reading that book.
Well, I've read your stuff, but I never tackled this one. And
yeah, well, before you go further, I have to say I'm as surprised as you. I mean. I thought after writing Kinsey, Sex and Fraud that, what else can be said, and then ended up doing the next one, Kinsey, Crimes and Consequences, which went in so much more into such depth in terms of the gutting of the laws, how that was brought about, and all that sort of thing. And then my last book now, my most recent one, Sexual Sabotage, which is, again, a whole new dimension that I had not even begun to anticipate. But I have to add here, Peter, that what I've been doing really is what, 100 other people should have been doing all along, and they'd have been digging all this sort of thing up. It should never have been left up to one researcher. That's ludicrous.
Yeah, and just... to know that the sexology business, which is now institutionalized and being taught in schools all across the country and the world, is founded upon this fraud is just astonishing. And it really it lends to those who believe in conspiracies, because it almost is a conspiracy, Judith, in the sense that they to this day, and correct me if I'm wrong, belief in the Kinsey approach. Kinseyite, the Kinsey scale, everything that goes along with his sexological approach is required to advance in this teaching industry. Correct?
Oh, right. Yeah. If you want to, to do any kind of get any kind of credential as a recognized homosexuality specialist, you must adhere to the Kinsey belief system. You must believe the frauds that were perpetrated all along, the Kinsey scale, of course, being a major component of that.
Now, Judith, just to bring people up to date, and I don't know if I hope I didn't read from this in a previous interview, but I've got the WorldNet Daily. You do a lot of writing for WorldNet Daily, and to their credit, they're helping get your work out. And a lot of your stories, it strikes me, if there was an enterprising journalist who just could get beyond the liberal, politically correct groupthink, there'd be some tremendous stories. And one of them is this woman whose the pseudonym is known as Esther White. That's not her real name. This is an article that ran last October 17th in WorldNet Daily. It's called, the headline on the WorldNet Daily piece is Stunner, Kinsey paid my father to rape me. Subhead is subject of 1940s, quote, research goes public with horrific tales of abuse by dad. And I just want to read a little part of this, Judith, and have you comment. It's about a woman who's now an old elderly woman who was recounting how her father. Now, I guess I should back up. First of all, let me warn anybody. I know the show airs at 11 o'clock at night, but if you're going to be listening online or wherever, this is a conversation for adults. This is serious information about how children were corrupted by this monster, Kinsey. To go back to the WorldNet Daily story, this woman, Esther White, that's her pseudonym, quote, her father was giving me orgasms and timing it with a stopwatch, she told WorldNet Daily. I didn't like it. I went into convulsions, but he didn't care. He said all little girls do this with their daddies. They just don't talk about it. She was 7 years old when her father began abusing her. And it goes on to say that she said that Kinsey enticed her grandfather, who was a friend of Kinsey, while studying at University of Indiana, to participate in this so-called research. And her grandfather, in turn, recruited two of his sons to molest their own daughters for Kinsey. She described Kinsey as insane, evil, and Satan incarnate. This is incredible. In 1943, when I was 9, Esther White told WorldNet Daily, quote, I found a sheet of paper that had boxes in it, and my father was checking off things he was doing to me. He grabbed it away from me and put it in a brown envelope. It was a form with little boxes down the left side of the page and a list of statements describing sexual acts. He was supposed to check things off when he did this or that. One of the statements on the sheet was timed orgasms. She said, I didn't know what orgasm meant, so I asked him, and he told me that's why he was using a stopwatch. And then the story goes on to show the tables where this so-called research would end up. Judith, this is just the most astonishing stuff that you've helped uncover.
Yeah, and what is astonishing, of course, then, is the complete control of the media, because this is a more dastardly story even than Tuskegee, which involved adult men, who were in prison, who were being really violated in their own way, medically, by the medical profession, experimented on. It's more dastardly than the LSD experiments. We're talking about a minimum of 317 infants and children. The youngest was 2 months of age. The outside number appears to be 2,035 children who were being sexually tortured, some around the clock, in 24-hour experiments conducted by Kinsey and his team. So the idea that this has been ignored by our media, ignored by our scientific community. Look, I mean, the first thing I did was to contact people in the scientific community, being quite naive and expecting that they would immediately launch an investigation. And I've been shut down everywhere I turned within the scientific world. The ethics groups are not interested at all. They don't even want to think about it. Now, I don't say anything here that isn't completely and absolutely proven in Kinsey's own work, proven in his own words, proven with the tables that he provided. When we talk about a stopwatch, what happened to Esther? Kinsey writes about the use of stopwatches to record the children's torture. He writes about them fainting, and he writes about them screaming and writhing in pain. Those are his words. And here we have an American mass media and American scientific community that refuses to touch this. that when I contacted Science Magazine, my quote-unquote colleagues, they refused to cover it in Science Magazine, though they cover the Kinsey Institute very, very glowingly. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're facing a serious issue here, very serious, in terms of the conspiratorial cover-up of these terrible crimes because of what that would mean to all of those who then have cited Kinsey, who today teach the Kinsey model, who the Kinsey Institute still in existence in Indiana University, having gotten millions of dollars over the years from our taxpayers' money and so forth. So, yes, a congressional investigation is overdue. It is deserving. We almost got one in 1992. There was an attempt to get one again in 1954. It was thwarted. I don't know if you got to that part in the book, but that's the Reese Committee, a congressional investigation.
Can you tell me in 25 seconds, Judith, did you get any big mainstream coverage from this Esther White story?
Hello?
Judith, you there?
Hello.
Hello, Judith. We're going to have to get her back. We're going to get her back on the line. She can't hear us. We're talking to Judith Reisman, who's the founder of the Institute for Media Education. She's the author of Sexual Sabotage, which you can get through WorldNet Daily Books at WND.com. I'm Pete LaBarbera with Americans for Truth. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back, everybody. We had a little technical problem, but we're talking to Judith Reisman, who is the author of several books exposing Alfred Kinsey, who is in the liberal world is revered as America's first sexologist, but in the real world, in the factual world, he was a monster who participated in and oversaw these awful sexual experiments of even between adults and children. And Judith, I wanted to ask you about Esther White, that story. Did it get beyond the conservative religious community media? Did it get?
Oh, absolutely not, Peter. As a matter of fact, Dr. Laura Schlesinger sent a copy of the British. There was a British documentary, Yorkshire Television, their science forum called Kinsey's Pedophiles, that exposed all of this in United Kingdom, and Dr. Laura Schlesinger sent a copy to PBS, and PBS didn't even respond to her letter. Didn't even respond. She said, if you're going to be glorifying these perverted behaviors, well, I shouldn't say perverted, but these unusual behaviors, then you need to broadcast this for your constituency, and they did not respond. And 60 Minutes had apparently looked at it and didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, nor any of the other big expose kinds of shows. I keep waiting for Glenn Beck to know more about it so we can get on that show and at least begin to reach some people.
Yeah, Glenn Beck, Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh. Come on, this is a major, major story. But Judith,
yes, it is. It is the story. It truly is the story of the century, because this man has completely gutted the Judeo-Christian common law that existed prior when seduction was against the law in the United States of America, much less adultery, much less the death penalty for rape, in half our states, life in the rest. So we've got a whole gutting of our legal system that is completely identified, documented as coming out of the Kinsey model through Kinsey and his cohorts.
Okay, I've got so many questions for you, Judith. Number one, originally the Kinsey Institute that he founded there at University of Indiana University, they originally tried to pawn off the story by saying he accepted this data from these pedophiles. But how quickly did you come to the understanding that he was participating, that he was intricately a part of it? Because are they still trying to sell that line that he just accepted this data?
Sure, they were pushed down that far. They tried to deny it ever happened anyway. And then they defended it by saying and so did Jim Jones, the guy who wrote the biography. They tried to defend it by saying, he just took the records from these pedophiles who were raping children and passed it on to the world and said that this is normal child sexuality. As
if they weren't bad enough, right?
Yeah, of course. But it turns out that that's absolutely untrue. There was no question about his direct and involvement. In fact, they deny that he ever solicited anybody to send, to give him information, that it was all already post-doc, that it happened prior. And that's not true. In his books, he solicits and he tells people, please get in touch with us, and we'll give you directions as to how to carry out your sex research on yourselves or others. There was no barring at all. And he was very clear about it. There's nothing unclear at all in his own writing about what he and his lovers, he was having sex with all of his people that he worked with, young, handsome males, by the way. He did not bring on anybody who wasn't a cute young fella. And they all worked under him, pardon the pun. And they all had to adhere to whatever it was that he chose to do. So he picked people whose sexual proclivities and sexual deviance was very much part of what his would be, because of course he had to fear anybody honest on his team. They would expose him. He could go to jail, and they've admitted that. They said they'd burn the records rather than let the police ever see what they were doing.
Now, there was one honest guy in the book. I remember you talk about there was an intern or something who said they should not take this data. And he called him.
Yeah, Nolis. He wasn't an intern. He actually was hired for a short time. The reason he was hired, that Kinsey did not want to hire him. He was a straight guy, and he left when he was being propositioned by Kinsey and his lovers, and he didn't want to have sex with them. He gently and gracefully bowed out, but he never revealed what Kinsey was up to. He never did that because it would have killed his professional career. But the reason he was hired was that he was a Rockefeller sort of grantee from a guy named Yerkes, and Kinsey could not rock that boat. So he did bring him on, kept him in the dark most of the time. And then when he brought him in at a certain point to their own sexual deviance, and he was asked to be part of it, he dropped out but never spoke of it until the Yorkshire Television interviewed him.
Wow. Now, Judith, I want to ask you, these records, is there any hope of getting the more detailed records that are buried in the Kinsey Institute in Indiana? Is there hope of getting them out? Would that take a government investigation?
Yes, of course it would. It would have to come out of a judge slapping an injunction on those folks, because there's no way they want that exposed. They've done everything in the world to try to cover it all up. But a judge slaps an injunction, or we get a congressional investigation or a grand jury investigation. Yes, you close the place down. You do what we should have done 50 years ago. You send the police in. They take over the place, and then we do the appropriate investigation of the records that are all there. The ones that are not there, we track where those are, because seldom do people want to completely destroy those kinds of records. They consider them to be treasures.
This would be like the sexual
somewhere.
Yeah, they're archived. This would be like the sexual Stasi, wouldn't it? I mean, you're going to have these records somewhere. The Stasi investigation of the communists in East Germany after it fell. This is just amazing. And Republicans or any brave Democrats. You'd have to be very brave as a Democrat given the proclivities of their party these days. But Republicans, here's an issue for you. You want to stand out in the primary? Why don't you talk about this? Why don't you call for an investigation of this? I'm amazed at the dullness of our political parties. There are stories, there are actions that need to be taken that cut against the grain of political correctness, but that would have that could make these political types heroes, Judith, in helping to expose this.
There is no downside for any Republican, except the loss of money, of course. But there's no downside in terms of votes in going public and demanding that this be investigated and so forth. People are very aware now of the whole issue of child sexual abuse. They've lost their love affair with science to the extent that they had it in the past. They do realize that scientists do bad things sometimes. As a matter of fact, too often. And there's a lot of awareness and receptivity in the general public today that simply did not exist 10 years, 15 years ago when I started 20 years ago when I started all this. And the public would be extremely concerned and extremely ready to receive any politicians who moved forward and use this as a battering ram against what's going on and what's happening to children all over the world, really.
Now, but before we get into the institutional follow-on to Kinsey and these groups like SICA, Sexual Information Education Council of the U.S., and all these things, Planned Parenthood, all these books, tell me, do you assume that more Esther Whites are going to come forward? Do you have contacts with others that are more explosive stories arising out of this so-called research?
Well, right now we have 3 other people who have come forward that I've been talking with. And if we were able really to get what we ought to have, and that is a proper investigation, and these people could feel protected, sufficiently protected, if there was a call for any other victims out there, like you do, like Ford, when the tires were bad, if there was a call for any other victims to step forward, as we do for bad medical material, goods and that sort of thing, we would get enough people to come forward to really do the proper investigation that we should be doing. Unfortunately, that has got to take some support from a larger organization, or certainly governmental offices would be extremely helpful to begin to do that. But these grievances should be redressed. I have the 3 people I'm talking about. There's one gentleman who went through a terrible experience at the hands of these people. It appears he has a right to know. He has a right to get into those files. And
was he molested by some older man?
Strongly within the Kinsey Institute people. But you see, the big problem is most of these folks, they were children when these things happened, and so they need to be able to have access to the Kinsey files so that they can begin to track down the documentation that's in there. These little kiddies weren't taking records, and when they were being filmed, they certainly were not being filmed with their own awareness. You see, that Esther was filmed. So some of those films will be in the Kinsey files. Some of them will be identifiable by these victims. There's the young man, there's a young woman. I mean, they're not young anymore. And the Kinsey Institute, one of the head of the Kinsey Institute, several actually, have said they're very worried about people coming forward who were victims, and they're very worried about being sued. And I don't blame them, except that there's been such a shutout from the scientific world and from the media world that they've been protected.
Yeah, boy, what a fair media would do for this country. It's just appalling. I want to get into the groups, as we talked about, that were the follow-ons to Kinsey, and also some of Kinsey's findings. We're talking with Judith Reisman, who is just a wonderful Jewish grandmother, but also a great researcher who's helped bring to light this terrible, terrible scandal that the media won't talk about, which is Alfred Kinsey and the whole sexology industry, which rests upon his very, very flawed and deceptive work. We'll be right back with Judith Reisman after the break. Welcome back to the Americans for Truth Hour. I'm Pete LaBarbera, president of Americans for Truth, and I'm interviewing my friend, Dr. Judith Reisman. By the way, her website is Dr. Judith, Dr. Judith Reisman. That's REISMAN.com. That's drjudithreisman.com. You can get her latest book, Sexual Sabotage, at WorldNet Daily, WND.com. Go to our website, AmericansForTruth.org, to get the earlier interviews with Judith. We'll have a total of 4. And Judith, there's so much to cover, and I'm worried I'm going to miss a lot. But on page 1...
You will.
Oh, you will. So we'll have to bring you back for 8 more interviews. Okay. And tell
people, there's a lot of material on on the website, they can just download. It's there to be used as public access.
Absolutely, and there's lots of great stuff there, as there is on WorldNet Daily, which is provides a great service by giving you publicity. Judith, and you have Kinsey's findings on page 170 of Kinsey Crimes and Consequences, and this book is probably, you might be able to get some on Amazon.com. That's why we're telling people
I think WorldNet Daily has some. I'm pretty sure I think they have.
Go to their books. They have a bookstore at WorldNet Daily. Just go there. But let me read a couple of your findings and just talk about them. Since we focus on homosexuality, your last one, well, actually, let's start with the first one. These are his basic, quote, findings. All orgasms are, quote, outlets and equal between husband and wife, boy and dog, man and boy, girl or baby, for there is no abnormality and no normality. Talk about that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, right now we have the Kinsey Institute on its YouTube talking about children being sexual in the womb. They're making that claim. They're saying that little baby boys have erections in the womb, and so therefore they are sexual. Now, it's very interesting because, and in fact, Mary Calderon of Planned Parenthood has made that claim, that children are sexual from womb to tomb. I find that very interesting when these are the groups that are advocating for a wholesale abortion of babies and saying that they're not not human. Yeah, so there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect there. But yeah, the whole argument is that since in fact they are quote unquote sexual womb to tomb, which is a fraud, right? Because there really is a normal, natural developmental process when children do attain sexual hormonal responses, and they're certainly not from womb to tomb. They are at puberty. So they can be abnormally stimulated. There's no question about that. They can be abnormally, prenaturally messed up. But the normal child is not so. And given an opportunity to grow in a natural, normal environment, they would normally evolve. So anyway, yeah, so their claim that the child is sexual from birth, womb to tomb, then allowed Kinsey, because he made that claim, he didn't say womb, he said birth. That makes children viable sexual targets for anybody and everybody. And Kinsey made that very clear. He called all sexual activity, quote, an outlet. Any outlet that attained what he called an orgasm, and he was, remember, a sadomasochistic, obsessive masturbator, pornography addict, and so forth. He was the real judge of normal human sexuality, as one could say.
He was a total pervert, and he was telling America what the norms were. He had a total self-interest in mainstreaming perversion.
Yeah, he was a sexual psychopath. Yeah, he was insane. He was a totally insane individual.
Can I interrupt you right there, Judith? And also on one of your pages here, he involved his own wife in sexual experiments with what? Everybody on the staff? Yeah.
What
a creep.
And all staff people. Well, she was there to serve as a front. I mean, he was a homosexual or homosexual. There's a whole lot of debate about which one. I don't care. He was certainly not a normal heterosexual male, and so as a result, as soon as he had finished his need for his wife to produce the children that would normalize his professorial position at the time, he took a bedroom upstairs. She had a bedroom downstairs, and he used to bring his boyfriends and so forth upstairs and have sex with them up there while she was left downstairs. Yeah, I know that the Neeson film, Liam Neeson played Kinsey in this big Fox Searchlight film, and they tried to sort of touch on that, but as usual, it was blame the victim. It was as though the wife was actually involved in this. She will do whatever it was that was necessary to maintain the cover for their marriage.
Oh man, and she was a big part of the sham because he was portrayed himself as the big family man, right, and enticed the media that way.
And she was photographed knitting, knitting in the little rocking chair. while in fact we have the records very clear that she was part of the whole. She would change the sheets when they would have these people come in and do these bizarre things, and they would have it would be messy. I won't go into details, and so they were very proud to say that his wife would come in and do all of the maid work. I guess you couldn't hire a maid for that.
Yeah, just like the Hyatt Regency, where there's the International Mr. Leather just recently in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to jump ahead here. Okay, so there's no normality, there's no abnormality, and then of course somehow, and explain how he did this. He said in your last point, homosexuals represent 10 to 37% of the population or more. Now, how did that whole thing? How did he get that?
Well, he could get it because, in fact, he could make up anything he wanted to, obviously. But what he did is he did most of his, 80-some% of his research was carried out, or his interviews were carried out during World War II, when everybody normal was really overseas fighting, and when homosexuals were not permitted access, to the armed services as opposed to today. And when he then had 1,400 sex offenders that he used, and a whole bizarre collection of people. From this bizarre collection of people, he then could say that 10 to 37% were homosexual or had some sort of homosexual ideation at certain points in time. So he just said anything that he chose to say in order to create the sense of normality of homosexuality so that the laws could be changed. The sodomy laws then, just in 2004, I think it was, or 3, the Lawrence versus Texas decision was almost 100%. I don't even want to say almost. When you actually examine the data that were used to change the sodomy laws, it was Kinsey. It was nobody else but the American Law Institute Model Penal Code 1955, which was a complete Kinsey document on sodomy. So he's changed your lives, and there's no one listening on this radio show right now who should walk away without realizing that this man had an enormous impact on their lives in legitimizing every form of dysfunction, including this whole tragic situation of transgender business where people are having their bodies completely mutilated, thinking that they're in the wrong sex and that sort of thing. So, yeah, he's had a huge impact on everybody's lives.
Okay, now here's another point of one of his findings. Early masturbation is critical for sexual, physical, and emotional health. It can never be excessive or pathological. And you see that. You see a lot of people talking about that these days.
Yeah, well, of course, masturbation in those years when he came out with that was viewed as abnormal. It was viewed as infantile. The whole idea was that men were supposed to grow up and take their manhood seriously and then find a woman, get married, and have sex, you see. I mean, that's what you're supposed to be doing. And, of course, Kinsey himself was an obsessive masturbator and a sadomasochistic one at that. And he used to torture his own organs, did so badly that he really deformed them, appears to have died of orchitis, which was a sexually transmitted disease and or a result of trauma to the genitals. So since Kinsey was having sex with his subjects and with his boyfriends and so forth, and also traumatizing his genitals, orchitis would be a natural reaction to that. So he died early. They say it was heartbreak. It was breaking other parts of the body more logically than heartbreak. Yeah, he tried to circumcise himself in the bathtub when he was one of our big, there he was already a famous man, having done his first book, and he was found in the bathtub with a knife, having tried to circumcise himself in a pool of blood. He did horrible things. We talked about that, right? And collapsed on the floor and that sort of thing. So this is a sexual psychopath that kicked off the sexual revolution that caused the American public to disbelieve their parents and their grandparents of the greatest generation, that caused the baby boomers to believe that their parents were a bunch of sexual hypocrites, and that there was no point in this silly Judeo-Christian boundaries and repression, and to give us Woodstock, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and to bring us to a point where we're talking about child trafficking in the United States of America.
Judith, a minute and a half, can you talk about his influence in mainstreaming pornography?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Well, it's a simple one. Hugh Hefner, who was a virgin in college, just like most guys were in those years, despite what Kinsey said, because he lied. Hugh Hefner read Kinsey and said, "Oh gosh, my parents have been lying to me all along. They've been, shagging around." And he said, "I will be Kinsey's pamphleteer." Those are his words over and over again. I will be his pamphleteer. I will bring his message to the general public through a magazine, and he did, through Playboy magazine, which spun off into Penthouse Hustler, which spun off into massive child pornography today. And remember, tell people, go on my website. Playboy sued me. I won. I accused them of producing child pornography deliberately, systemically. They sued me for libel in the Netherlands, not in the United States, in the Netherlands, and I won. So go on the website, and you'll see all the documentation for that.
And some people who don't look at pornography don't realize that Playboy and Penthouse, these magazines promote incest. They promote bestiality. They promote the whole Kinsey model of anything goes.
Yeah, and of course homosexuality, although they use females.
Right, and Judith, we got one more section here, then we go to our part 4. I'm going to ask you to comment on this idea that human beings are naturally bisexual. And that children are sexual and potentially orgasmic from birth. Kinsey laid the basis for the pedophile crisis that followed. We're talking to Judith Reisman. Her website is drjudithreisman.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Americans for Truth Hour. We're in the last segment of part 3 of our 4-part interview with Judith Reisman. And although the topic is just horrifying, I take joy in the fact that we're helping to get out truth. And this is the media's job. The media needs to stop covering up for the liberals and expose this terrible, terrible scandal. Okay, Judith, I alluded to a couple of these points really quickly. Human beings are naturally bisexual. This is your interpretation of Kinsey's work. Human beings are naturally bisexual. Religious bigotry and prejudice forces people into chastity, heterosexuality, and monogamy. So he was crusading against religion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Crusading, especially against Judeo-Christian religion. He would be happy if we would be sort of a Yemen, like the population in Yemen right now, which is not really what most women and children would desire or do well in. And let's not forget, before we leave pornography, that one of the key components in pornography is the production of impotence. All pornography will spin off into impotence for the user. He will need those pictures, he will need those images in order to attain what was normal and natural for grandpa and great-grandpa, and he won't be able to function without them, which means then that we're talking about huge benefits to the big pharma in terms of all of its Viagra supports and then in terms of all of the fallout from the sexual revolution. So getting back to the bisexuality.
Wow. Well, really quickly on the porn thing. So, and men and whoever, I guess there's now probably a rise in female porn. I don't know.
Sure.
They need ever more greater stimulus. That the old porn doesn't work, so they need new porn, even worse. And is that how it devolves into child porn?
Yeah. Very few people even today just start off with the child porn. It used to be it wouldn't be possible at all. Now remember, Playboy was doing child pornography gently, through cartoons, gently moving from little observational cartoons into big full color cartoons, very, very cleverly done, very manipulative, and then into photographs. So they condition their consumer all along the way. Whatever you can laugh at, you can accept doing, okay, eventually. You want to treat things as though they're funny, and then that moves you into treating it as though that's legitimate. So that's
how the acceptance of homosexuality. Remember the first soap opera, or whatever that show where they laughed at it at first. The gay guy was the funny guy.
And then that reduces your fear, and that makes you feel superior, and that sort of thing. And then the next thing you know, you're dealing with that being taught in the classroom by your SICUS educated teacher or your Planned Parenthood educated teacher, which is you wanted me to mention, and that is that nobody in the field of human sexuality education, not at the bottom end of the rung, from kindergarten through to PhD, through to all the books and so forth, no one who's an officially accredited human sexuality specialist and that's been trained, quote unquote, appropriately, is not Kinsey trained. Remember, there was no field of human sexuality prior to Kinsey. None, zero, nada.
Somehow we survived, Judith. Somehow our nation survived without that. How did we do it?
Isn't that interesting? And we not only survived, but we did have we only had 2 STDs. There wasn't even an AIDS running around, massacring thousands of people. We didn't even have genital herpes as a common problem. So, and out-of-wedlock pregnancies were down at the bottom of the chart, as was divorce. And now we have then we moved to the no-fault divorce. It's all in my books, ladies and gentlemen. I went through a great deal of effort to document all that for you and for the scientific community, which turns its back on everything because it's going to expose their not having exposed what they should have exposed a long time ago.
All right, Judith, you mentioned the teachers. The teachers are all Kinseyites. Talk about SIECUS, which stands for the Sex Information and Education Council of the U.S., which was launched by the Kinsey Institute to teach his approach. And how pervasive, how important is SIECUS, and what does it teach? 5 minutes.
Well, I'll go on. Yeah, SIECUS is on the web. You should go on there. But the SIECUS is how I got involved. And one of my children brought home a pamphlet from, it was actually Planned Parenthood. This one was, although you remember the head of Planned Parenthood, the medical director of Planned Parenthood was Mary Calderon. She became the founder of SIECUS, so it's interlocked. And you've changed the combination, and it says if you want, if you want a warm body, buy one. There are girls who have freely chosen that business. If you want a virgin to marry, buy one. There are girls who have freely chosen that business. 2, marriage is the price you'll pay, and you get the virgin very temporarily. Now, this kind of so-called sex education has been going, and that was 1974. But the end of the 1960s, we began to see these people calling themselves experts because they believe they had been trained in the Kinsey mode and model. And we began to see these people entering into the schools and taking over the teaching of hygiene, human sexuality. And the next thing we know, SIECUS has published a document, an insider document on how to train people and how to teach sex education and get around the parents. That was very important. And they've been very clear about that, how you can get around the parents. Why? Because parents really didn't want some so-called objective teacher standing up there teaching their children how to engage in all sorts of deviant sexual activity and telling them it's okay. Can I read you one of the things from SIECUS from your book on page 179? Oh, please do.
It says, this is from SIECUS report of September-October 1988. Quote, this is guidelines for youngsters. A partial list of safe sex practices for teens could include massaging, caressing, undressing each other, masturbation alone, masturbation in front of a partner, mutual masturbation. By helping teens explore the full range of safe sexual behaviors, we may help to raise a generation of adults that do not equate sex with intercourse or intercourse with vaginal orgasm as the goal of sex, unquote. So I guess that's Bill Clinton, right?
Oh, that is indeed. He was called the poster boy for SIECUS and Kinsey. But yeah, and that's very important because, first of all, they've had to change the language. Their initial material was telling kids to have sex, and they didn't say much about condoms. Then we had all this venereal disease amongst our children, right? And so they started saying, well, we'll have safer sex. Now they've added safer, not safe, but safer. Meantime, I'm saying you've got thousands and thousands of people out there who, because of the kind of fraud they were taught in the classroom about sex, have contracted venereal diseases or have had babies when they were not prepared to have babies and they weren't married and that sort of thing. And those people, had they been taught the things that they were taught by SIECUS-educated teachers and Planned Parenthood-educated teachers, have a lawsuit in just waiting to happen. These people held themselves out as experts, went into the classrooms under the cover of expertise and of government-approved education, told these children to engage in sexual activity way before their brains were in any way, shape, or form ready to begin to consider that kind of activity, told the children that they should be doing it, told the children it would be okay. Go ahead and do it. It's not going to hurt your heart. It's not going to cause you any trouble at all. Well, they did what they were instructed in the classroom. And in fact, what they did is they contracted massive amounts of venereal disease, and they not only had that kind of physical response, but they had the emotional trauma that goes with it.
What about the young? 1 minute left, Judith. The young children. What does SIECUS advocate for the very young? that they be taught?
Right now, yeah, we're talking about moving it down into kindergarten, and they're talking about we have to do it earlier, much earlier. And along with that, we're even talking about some doctors advocating giving children hormone blocking injections to stop their natural pubescent growth, because the children are being told that it may be a boy in the girl's body and it may be a girl in the boy's body, and therefore, if a child is insecure about whether they're a boy or a girl, and come on, I was a tomboy, I mean, if a child's insecure about that, where they hear it everywhere they turn, that they are going to be receiving all kinds of chemical alterations to their body.
I'll have to stop you there, Judith. We'll catch you next time. Talking to Judith Reisman. Her website is drjudithreisman.com. Our website is americansfortruth.com. Go out and stand for truth. We'll talk to you next week.